when one man's 3-day battle saved his unit. This is the story they never forgot. It is a story not of a sweeping offensive, but of desperate, isolated defense. A story where the fate of hundreds rested on the resilience of a single soldier. In the vast, brutal expanse of the Eastern Front, amidst the chaos of a crumbling front line, such acts of individual valor often went unrecorded, lost to the cold and the fog of war. But for the men of the 3rd Battalion, 422nd Infantry Regiment, 106th Infantry Division, their survival hinged on a quiet, unassuming technical sergeant from Maryland. This is the account of a siege within a siege, a solitary vigil fought from a shattered farmhouse on the outskirts of the Belgian hamlet of Schönberg. The date was December 17, 1944. The German Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, was just 1 day old, and an entire American division was already facing annihilation. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must first comprehend the strategic disaster unfolding across the Schnee-Eifel region. The 106th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Golden Lions, was fresh, having only arrived in Europe in early December and taken up positions in what was considered a quiet sector of the Ardennes forest. Their lines were thin, their experience limited. Among them was Technical Sergeant Robert M. Bob Kelly, a 24-year-old squad leader in Company K. Kelly was a natural soldier, steady, resourceful, and deeply loyal to his men. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16, 1944, the peaceful silence of the snow-dusted forest was obliterated by the deafening roar of a massive German artillery barrage. Hitler's last great gamble in the West had begun. The 106th Division stood directly in the path of the 5th Panzer Army's main thrust. By the end of the first day, the division's 2 forward regiments, the 422nd and 423rd, were dangerously exposed on 3 sides, their flanks turned by advancing German infantry and panzers. Orders from higher command were confused and contradictory. Hold in place. As a result, nearly 9,000 American soldiers found themselves in a rapidly tightening pocket, cut off from supply and reinforcement. With communications failing and the bitter cold deepening, the 3rd Battalion was ordered to withdraw from its forward positions and form a new defensive perimeter near Schönberg, a critical road junction. Their mission: hold open a potential escape route for the trapped regiments. It was here, on a small hill overlooking a key approach road, that Sergeant Kelly and his squad were ordered to establish an outpost in a sturdy, 2-story stone farmhouse. This position was the battalion's easternmost eye. What Kelly and his men did not know was that the entire 293rd Volksgrenadier Regiment was advancing directly toward them. By dawn on December 17th, the situation was dire. German panzers had already overrun Schönberg itself. The 3rd Battalion's perimeter was a ragged, tense circle in the woods and fields west of the town. Sergeant Kelly's squad, 12 men in total, fortified the farmhouse as best they could, sandbagging windows, creating firing ports in the stone walls, and setting up their single, water-cooled .30 caliber M1917 Browning machine gun in the second-floor window with the best field of fire. They could hear the sounds of battle drawing closer, the distinctive crack of M1 Garens, the burp of German MP-40s, and the earth-shaking thunder of tank fire. A cold, misting rain began to fall, turning the snow to slush. At 1030 hours, battalion headquarters made radio contact. Keep your eyes east. Report any movement. You are our early warning. Kelly acknowledged. Just after 1100 hours, his lookout, PFC Jenkins, whispered sharply, "Movement. Tree line, 800 yards." Through his binoculars, Kelly saw them. A skirmish line of German infantry in field gray, perhaps a platoon, cautiously advancing across the open field. He ordered his men to hold fire. He knew their greatest advantage was concealment. He radioed the contact back to battalion. The response was grim. "Hold your position. You must delay them. Reinforcements are not available." By 1400 hours, the German probe had become a concerted assault. A company-sized force, supported by 2 MG-42 machine gun teams, began a textbook advance, using fire and movement. Kelly gave the order to fire. The Browning machine gun roared to life. Its steady thump thump thump, a stark contrast to the ripping sound of the German MG-42s. The Americans poured rifle fire into the advancing line. The initial assault wavered and fell back, leaving several dark shapes on the muddy field. But the reprieve was short-lived. German mortars, their tubes thumping from the distant tree line, began walking rounds toward the farmhouse. The world dissolved into noise, smoke, and shattering stone. For 3 brutal hours, Kelly's squad repelled repeated attacks. Casualties began to mount. A mortar round slammed into the ground floor, wounding 3 men. The medic, Private Riley, was killed by a sniper while trying to drag a wounded comrade inside. Ammunition for the bar was running critically low. At 17:30, as the early winter darkness began to settle, a German 75mm infantry gun was manhandled into position. Its first high-explosive shell smashed through the upper story wall, collapsing part of the roof and silencing the Browning machine gun, its crew dead or wounded. Kelly, his face streaked with blood and soot, took stock. Of his 12 men, 5 were dead, 4 were seriously wounded. Only he and 2 others, Private Driscoll and Corporal Miller, were still combat effective. Their radio was destroyed. They were cut off, surrounded, and running out of time. As night fell, a lull descended. The German forces, consolidating for a final push, held the field. Kelly could see the flicker of their small fires in the tree line. He knew the farmhouse could not withstand a coordinated night assault. He made a decision. Under cover of darkness, he would evacuate the wounded back to the battalion perimeter, 800 yards through enemy-patrolled fields. It was a desperate gamble. Using a makeshift litter, he, Driscoll, and Miller, under a moonless, overcast sky, began the agonizingly slow trek. Twice they froze as German patrols passed within 50 yards. After 2 hours of torturous progress, they stumbled into a Company L listening post. The wounded were rushed to the aid station. Kelly immediately reported to the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph T. Joe Matthews. He detailed the enemy's strength, their dispositions, and the loss of the outpost. Colonel Matthews, his face drawn with exhaustion, looked at the young sergeant. "Kelly, that road you were watching is their likely main axis for a dawn attack on our perimeter. If they bring armor down that road, we're finished. I have no men to spare for a counterattack to retake that hill." Kelly understood the unspoken question. He looked at the few remaining men of his squad, now being treated. He then looked back at his commander. "Sir, let me go back. I can observe. I can call in mortar fire if they mass. I can be your eyes." Matthews stared at him, knowing it was a suicide mission. Finally, he nodded. "Take what you need." The threat revealed. Just before 0400 hours on December 18th, Sergeant Kelly, armed only with his M1 rifle, 6 grenades, a .45 pistol, and as much ammunition as he could carry, began to crawl back toward the farmhouse. The bitter cold seeped through his wool uniform. The ground was frozen mud. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig, sounded like a thunderclap in the silent dark. By first light, he had reached the shattered shell of the building. The Germans, assuming it abandoned, had not yet reoccupied it. He took up a concealed position in the rubble of the second floor, with a clear view of the road and the fields beyond. What he saw made his blood run colder than the winter air. The Germans were preparing for a major assault. An entire battalion was assembling in the tree line. He counted at least 2 companies of infantry, mortar teams setting up base plates, and, most terrifyingly, 3 Sturmgeschütz 3 assault guns, their short, thick barrels menacing in the gray dawn light. These 75mm armored vehicles were the key. Once they moved down the road, they would blast a hole in the 3rd Battalion's perimeter, and the infantry would pour through. The 3rd Battalion had no anti-tank guns left. Their few bazookas were useless against the Stooges' frontal armor at range. Kelly's radio, a scratchy, low-powered SR 536 handy-talkie, crackled to life. He reported the armor in a hushed, urgent tone. Back at the command post, Colonel Matthews had one final card to play, a single battery of 105mm howitzers from the division artillery, its fire direction barely within range. But he needed precise coordinates. He needed Kelly's eyes. "Kelly, can you adjust fire?" The request was almost absurd. Adjusting artillery, alone, from an exposed forward position, while under direct enemy observation, was a job for a trained team. "I'll try, sir," came the static-filled reply. At 0630 hours, the German attack began. The infantry advanced in long, disciplined lines. The Sturmgeschütz threes growled forward, tracks clinking, staying on the road for better footing. Kelly, his heart pounding, called in the first fire mission. Fire for effect. Grid 743891. Enemy infantry in the open. Minutes later, the shriek of incoming shells filled the air. The rounds landed long, exploding harmlessly in the empty field behind the Germans. Kelly, remembering his rudimentary training, corrected. Dropped 200, left 50. The next salvo was closer, but still not on target. The German infantry, now aware of an observer, began to lay down suppressing fire on the farmhouse. Bullets zipped and pinged through the stone. One of the Stugis traversed its main gun, aiming directly at his position. This was the crisis, the impossible situation. Kelly was alone, his corrections failing, with an armored vehicle about to obliterate his hiding place. The main German force was minutes from launching its final, crushing advance on his besieged battalion. He was their only hope, and he was about to be silenced. The weight of hundreds of lives pressed down on him in that frozen, ruined room. Fear gripped him, not just for his own life, but for the certain destruction of every man he served with. The roar of the German small arms fire, the grinding of tank tracks, the shouts of enemy commands, it was a cacophony of impending doom. Then, in a moment of sheer, desperate clarity, Sergeant Kelly realized his error. He was trying to hit the infantry, but they were a dispersed, moving target. The real threat, the linchpin of the entire enemy attack, was the armor on the road. A stationary, linear target. He keyed his radio, ignoring the bullets chipping stone around him. Cancel, cancel. New mission. Target. Enemy armor on East-West Road, Grid 743889. Request VT fuse. Repeat, VT fuse. He was calling for the highly secret and rare variable time fuse, designed to detonate shells in the air above ground targets. It was a long shot that the battery even had them. The gun crew, heroes in their own right, responded. They had a limited supply. VT fuse available. Shot over. Kelly waited, his eyes locked on the lead Stugee. Shot out, he acknowledged. The longest 30 seconds of his life ticked by. Then, the sky above the road erupted. VT fuse shells exploded not on impact, but in a deadly rain of steel shards from above. This was the one thing the thin top armor of the assault guns could not withstand. The effect was catastrophic. Shrapnel shredded the infantry clustered near the vehicles. More critically, it hammered down onto the Sturmgeschütz threes. The lead vehicle shuddered, its track shattered. Black smoke began pouring from its engine compartment. The second veered off the road and became bogged in the soft earth of the field. The third reversed frantically. Seizing the moment of chaos, Kelly began calling fire missions on the now panicked and exposed infantry. Fire for effect, right where they are. The 105mm shells rained down with devastating accuracy. The German attack, so meticulously prepared, disintegrated into a bloody shambles. The assault was broken. For the next 2 days, December 18th and 19th, Kelly remained in his solitary outpost. He survived on captured German bread and water from his canteen. He slept in brief, fitful minutes. He continually called in artillery on any enemy concentration he observed, single-handedly directing the defense of the battalion's eastern flank. He became a phantom, a ghost in the rubble that summoned steel from the sky. The Germans, convinced the farmhouse was occupied by a full forward observer team, eventually began calling it Hexenhaus, the witch's house, daring not to approach it directly. On the night of December 19th, The 3rd Battalion, along with the shattered remnants of the 422nd and 423rd Regiments, attempted a desperate breakout to American lines. Sergeant Kelly, guided by the sounds of battle, fought his way back through German lines and rejoined what was left of his company. The Battle of the Schnee Eifel was a devastating American defeat, with over 7,000 men captured, one of the largest mass surrenders in U.S. military history. Yet, the 3rd Battalion managed to extract a significant portion of its men in that breakout, avoiding complete encirclement. Historians agree that the delay and disruption Kelly caused on the 18th was instrumental, buying the battalion the critical time it needed to organize its escape. For his actions, Technical Sergeant Robert M. Kelly was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. The citation reads, in part, "For extraordinary heroism, his fearless direction of artillery fire from an isolated advanced position was decisive in breaking up repeated enemy attacks and allowed his battalion to avoid destruction." The men of Company K and the 3rd Battalion never forgot. In reunions for decades after, the story of Bob Kelly and the Witch's House was told and retold. He was the man who, for 3 days, held the door closed against a regiment. He passed away in 1987, a quiet hero who embodied the idea that in the maelstrom of total war, the courage and competence of one individual can alter the fate of many. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Stories of impossible choices, of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, and of the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of combat. Subscribe to Untold War Stories as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.